In this video we will talk about the last gamble of the satanic world occult government. The final zombie attack. We will see how the effects of 5G telephony will unleash a massive wave of zombies. Reality will overcome fiction. Subscribe to the channel, leaving your like for the video to gain relevance and save and awaken as many people as possible from the corrupt hidden system. Humanity that is not spiritually awake is involved in a web of sacrifice with no return. There is today on Earth a 5G satellite broadband. The satellites will operate at an altitude of approximately 210 miles, 338 kilometers, and will radiate the Earth at extremely high frequencies between 37.5 GHz and 42 GHz. This fleet will be added to a smaller SpaceX fleet of 4,425 satellites, already authorized early last year by the FCC, which will orbit the Earth at a height of approximately 750 miles, 1,207 kilometers, and is configured to bathe us in electromagnetic frequencies between 12 GHz and 30 GHz. The grand total of SpaceX satellites is therefore projected to reach just under 12,000 satellites in Earth orbit. This will be the trigger to turn everyone who has been bitten into zombies. You heard right. This is no joke, believe me. Awaken and decontaminate your immune system. There are currently around 2,000 fully functioning satellites orbiting the Earth. Some send commercial GPS, or sat-nav, satellite navigation system, some provide TV broadcast signals, some provide mobile phone services, and some direct the radar back and forth to produce images for meteorologists and radar surveillance, military. The Earth, therefore, has already been fully irradiated from outer space. But SpaceX's new fleets will constitute a massive increase in the number of satellites in the skies above us, and a correspondingly massive increase in radiation reaching Earth emitted from them. The SpaceX satellite fleet is, however, just one of several that will be launched over the next few years, all serving the same purpose of providing global broadband services. Other companies, including military-industrial complex giant Boeing, OneWeb and Spire Global, are each launching their own smaller fleets. Decontaminate your immune system. Why this sudden surge of activity? The new fleets of satellites are contributing to a concerted global effort to update the Earth's electromagnetic environment. The upgrade is commonly referred to as a 5G or fifth-generation wireless telephony network. It has become customary in tech circles to talk about the introduction of 5G as involving the creation of a new global electronic ecosystem. The Earth's magnetic field is completely altered due to the imminent arrival of Planet X. Nibiru, the world elite, knows and calculated a final control engineering through the stings. Now everything is being activated with the 5G network. It's planetary engineering on a scale never before attempted. While this is being sold to the public as an improvement to the quality of streaming video for media and entertainment, what is really driving it is creating the conditions within which electronic or artificial intelligence, AI, will be able to take over an increasing dimension and presence in our daily lives. The introduction of 5G will also require hundreds of thousands of new mobile miniphone antennas, also called microcells or base stations, in urban centers across Australia, and literally millions of new antennas in cities around the world, all emitting radiation at frequencies and power levels much higher than those to which we are currently subjected. These new masts are much smaller than what we currently see next to highways and on top of buildings. They will be discreetly affixed to the sides of stores and offices or attached to electrical distribution poles. The 20,000 satellites are a necessary complement to this terrestrial effort, as they will ensure that rural areas, lakes, mountains, plains, forests, oceans and wilderness areas, where there are no buildings or light poles, will all be incorporated into the new electronic infrastructure. Not an inch of the globe will be free of radiation. Imagine all the evil pathologies in human bodies, due to radioactive frequencies and waves. The result will be zombie beings like in the movie, World War Z. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like, spread this video. Help save lives. Subscribe to the channel. We are spiritual awakeners. The war is spiritual, not against flesh and blood. Given the scale of the project, it's surprising how few people are aware of the enormity of what is now just beginning to unfold around us and above our heads. Very few people have heard of the 20,000 new satellites that will transform the planet into the so-called smart planet, beaming at us night and day. In the national media, we hear no voices questioning the wisdom, much less the ethics, of engineering a new global electromagnetic environment. Instead, there is a joyful, bovine acceptance that technology must continue to progress, and the presence in our lives of increasingly smart machines and devices that every year become smarter and more capable is an inevitable part of that pseudo-progress. And who doesn't want progress? Almost everyone loves their sleek and seductively designed phones, iPads and virtual assistants, and considers them an indispensable part of their lives, at least the vast majority of zombies. The question we must ask is whether we also want an increasingly intense exposure of the natural environment and of all living creatures, including ourselves, humanity, to more and more electromagnetic radiation. Is it even likely that this will not have any adverse consequences for our health, the natural environment, bees, animals, as the government and industry claim? If the electromagnetic waves that connect our smartphones to the internet travel and pass through bricks, stones and cement, then what happens when those same waves encounter and pass through our bodies? Make sure they don't bounce off of us. They travel straight into the human body. The degree to which they are absorbed can be accurately measured in what is called the specific absorption rate, expressed in watts per kilogram of biological tissue. When we fill our homes with Wi-Fi, we continually radiate our bodies with electromagnetic energy. When we put a smartphone to our ear, electromagnetic waves radiate into our brains. Do we really believe this can be completely harmless? Currently, cell phones, smartphones, tablets, Wi-Fi and so on operate below the 3 GHz band in the so-called microwave region of the electromagnetic spectrum. If you could see and measure their wavelengths, you would find that they are many centimeters, or inches, long. A smartphone operating at 800 MHz, for example, sends and receives signals with wavelengths of 37.5 centimeters, just under 15 inches. Operating at 1.9 GHz, the wavelengths are 16 centimeters, just over 6 inches. Wi-Fi uses the 2.4 GHz frequency band with wavelengths of 12 centimeters, just under 5 inches long. The introduction of 5G will imply the use of frequencies considerably higher than these, with correspondingly shorter wavelengths. Above 30 GHz, the wavelengths are just millimeters instead of centimeters. The millimeter band, from 30 GHz to 300 GHz, is known as the extremely high frequency, and its wavelengths are between 10 and 1 millimeter long. To date, extremely high-frequency electromagnetic radiation has not been widely propagated, and its introduction marks a significant change in the type of energy. The reason millimeter waves should be used for 5G telephony is that much larger spectrum bands are available at extremely high frequencies than at lower frequencies. This means that there can be a much wider bandwidth. Wider bandwidth means that large amounts of data can be transferred, and the data transfer speed will be significantly faster. One of the effects of this is that it reduces what is called latency or time lag in the system, improving the quality of streaming video. But in doing so, it also allows for greater uniformity between the data accessible from virtual sources and our perceptions of objects in the real world, as is needed, for example, in augmented reality applications. Greater uniformity means that we more easily inhabit the natural and electronic worlds as if they were a single reality. Subscribe to the channel, and leave your like. Let's save human lives. Fight against Satan's system. One of the technical problems with using frequencies in the millimeter region of the electromagnetic spectrum is that because the waves that carry the data are so tiny, being only millimeters in length, they are less able to pass through physical barriers such as walls and trees than they are the longer waves of lower frequencies. That is why it is necessary to have many more new microcells or base stations. They will need to be spaced within 100 meters of each other in cities because beyond that distance their signals weaken and therefore are less able to penetrate buildings and connect with indoor devices. In addition to being more widely spaced, 5G microcells will operate at a much higher power than current telephony antennas to ensure that signals are strong enough. Because the wavelengths are much shorter, the antennas that transmit and receive them will also be much smaller than those on current telephone masts and electronic devices. A single 5G transmitter, receiver will have a large number of tiny antennas, grouped into a unit. An array of just over 1,000 of these antennas measures just 16 square centimeters, so it will easily fit into a small base station fixed to a street lamp post, while the smartphone in your pocket will likely be 16. Both 5G satellites and 5G terrestrial antennas will use a system called phased array. In a phased array, groups of antennas are coordinated to radiate pulses in a specified direction and in a specified time sequence. This allows a concentrated beam of radio waves to be directed exactly at designated targets to allow signals to be sent or received. Since the beams are concentrated in this way, it increases their power, meaning they are able to penetrate buildings more easily. But it also means that any living creature that gets in the way of such a concentrated beam of energy will also be subject to a powerful dose of extremely high-frequency radiant electromagnetism. A study published earlier this year demonstrated that certain insects, because of their small body size, are particularly vulnerable to the higher frequency millimeter waves being utilized by the 5G system. Other studies have shown that bacteria and plants are vulnerable to incoming radiation, as might be expected, the skin and eyes of animals, including, of course, humans themselves. In other words, human beings, transformed into zombies because they were already implemented with the transmitter's stings, nanotechnological antennas in their bodies will now be activated. That's why they force people. In addition to its ability to concentrate energy into focused beams, phased array technology has another complicating factor. On either side of the main beam, the time intervals between the pulses are different from the time intervals between those in the main beam, but they can overlap in ways that produce extremely rapid changes in the electromagnetic field. This can have a particularly harmful effect on living organisms, because instead of radiation decaying as it is, absorbed by living tissue, it can be re-radiated back into the body. The mobile charges that flow into the body effectively become antennae that re-radiate the electromagnetic field and send it deeper into the body. These re-radiated waves are known as Brillouin precursors, named after the French physicist Léon Brillouin, who first described them in 1914. Decontaminate your immune system with sodium bicarbonate, potassium, vitamin D3, garlic and minerals. Spiritual Awakening 2022 Year of Truth. The less reassuring guarantees of governments and industry. The government body, in Australia, charged with advising on the effects of electromagnetic radiation on human health, the Australian Radiation Protection and Nuclear Safety Agency, ARPANSA, seeks to assure us that there is no established evidence that radio frequency radiation, which radio, television, cell phones, smartphones and 5G from all use, has any adverse health effects on adults or children. ARPANSA's advice is largely based on findings derived from the supposedly independent EGNOR, Advisory Group on Non-Ionizing Radiation, which advises the UK Department of Health. The EGNOR report, published in 2012, on the safety of radio frequency radiation stated that compelling and conclusive evidence for any adverse health effects was lacking. It was like giving the telecommunications industry a blank check to switch to the higher frequencies without caring about the consequences. Subscribe to the channel. Use this video save your son, your wife, your husband, your family. We are the resistance. Stay away from large urban centers. It turns out that, far from being independent, the Agner body has a high proportion of members with blatant conflicts of interest, and their report distorted or simply left out the evidence that should have led them to reach a conclusion opposite to the one they arrived at. In a forensic analysis of the report, environmental health researcher Sarah Starkey makes it clear that only an intentional disregard for available scientific evidence could explain its internal contradictions and apparent incompetence. Still, it appears that it is not only the basis of current UK government policy, but also Australian government policy, allowing for 5G deployment without even a nod to the need for a prior health and safety assessment. Health and safety simply do not appear on government thinking, despite the veritable mountain of literally thousands of research papers demonstrating adverse human health effects that continue to grow at a rate of around 350 per year, on average nearly one per day. One of the reasons for ignoring this evidence in the accelerated deployment to create the 5G electronic ecosystem is the conviction in government circles that unless we introduce it immediately, we will be left behind and our economic growth and competitiveness will be put at risk. There is simply no time to consider the possible consequences for human health. The rewards of the connected future must be measured in billions of dollars of revenue. The mind-boggling amounts involved are well exemplified in a recent estimate that the global media industry alone is expected to earn $1.3 trillion from 5G deployment by 2025, primarily because 5G will unlock the potential of augmented reality, AR, and reality virtual, VR. The irony that the connected future is one in which dizzying profits can be made from technologies that increasingly disconnect us from the real, natural world and our health is totally forgotten. The sums involved are sufficient to explain why the telecommunications industry has, over the past 25 years, done its best to ensure that research into the effects of wireless technologies on health has produced negative or inconclusive results. Since 1993, the industry has funded a large number of studies, saving governments a lot of expense while preserving the convenient illusion that the jury has not yet decided whether exposure to radio frequency radiation causes harm. Earlier this year, The Guardian published an article citing research that showed that while 67% of independently funded studies found a biological effect from exposure to radio frequency radiation, only 28% of industry-funded studies did. Industry-funded studies are nearly 2.5 times less likely than independent studies to find health effects. The authors of the Guardian article explain that the telecommunications industry does not need to win the scientific argument about security, but simply keep the argument going indefinitely, producing studies with results that fail to verify, or rather contradict, the research that does find adverse effects. The health. One of the most notorious is the massive industry-funded Interphone study which concluded that holding a mobile phone to the head actually protects the user from brain tumors. This study, which is full of contradictions and suffers from serious design flaws, is often cited as the most reliable to date, although in fact it has been totally discredited. However, the impression remains that there is no scientific consensus and, therefore, there are not enough grounds for taking action against the spread of 5G telephony. Needless to say, this suits government puppets as much as it suits industry. The path to total immersion. In addition to the effects on human health, there is another level of what the implementation of 5G technology actually entails. To gain perspective on this, we must remember that it was not so long ago that the Earth's electromagnetic field was not disturbed by electromagnetic frequencies generated by human society. Prior to the 1880s, there were only two main causes of electromagnetism, both of which were natural: lightning from thunderstorms, which also triggered the very weak low-frequency resonances known as Schumann resonances, and light and solar energy. The rays and energy of the Sun produce effects in specific and very limited parts of the electromagnetic spectrum. The very idea that something like electromagnetism and an electromagnetic spectrum existed was not even entertained before the 19th century. And from a pre-electrical age point of view, the truth of the matter is that they didn't really exist as an experience factor. Aside from lightning and energy from the Sun, the energies of the electromagnetic spectrum had no impact on human life as they were totally dormant. In that pre-tech world, both lightning and the energy of the Sun were regarded with a degree of awe, as natural phenomena that expressed powers greater than anything human beings could muster. In antiquity both were associated with gods, lightning with violent storm gods, invariably with associations of the underworld such as Seth, Baal and Zeus, and the energy and light of the Sun with sublime solar deities like Ra, Shamash and Apollo. In the later Judeo-Christian era, the widespread feeling persisted that these phenomena had a spiritual source, with lightning regarded as expressive of divine wrath and light as the garment of the cosmic logos. We touch here on a deeply felt relationship with nature that has been largely eroded over the centuries since the scientific revolution. Over the course of the 18th and 19th centuries, both lightning and light were stripped of their spiritual numinosity, paving the way for an entirely materialistic explanation of light and an entirely technological approach to electricity. Subscribe to the channel and like for relevance and awaken as many people as possible. Knowledge is power. At first, the frequencies used were at the lower end of the electromagnetic spectrum. In the 1890s, the transmission lines that supplied the new electrical grid to factories and homes standardized on 50 or 60 Hz, or cycles per second. When public radio broadcasts began in the 1920s, they were mostly on long-wave frequencies below 500 kHz, thousands of cycles per second. As the century passed, the frequencies used by new and improved technologies became increasingly higher. In the 1930s and 40s, medium and shortwave frequencies, between 500 kHz and 1700 kHz, were used, while in the 1950s very high frequencies, VHF, of 30 to 300 MHz, or millions of cycles per second, were employed for both radio and TV broadcasting. During World War II, a method was discovered to generate even higher frequencies, between 3 and 30 GHz, thousands of millions of cycles per second, which became the basis of radar. With each increase in frequency, more power was needed to transmit the radio waves. The advent of cell phones, smartphones and Wi-Fi has brought into widespread use the part of the ultra-high frequency, UHF, spectrum, 300 MHz to 3 GHz, for signal transmission. Transmission on these frequencies requires more than 10 times the power required for VHF transmission. Today, on the threshold of the new era of an extremely high-frequency electronic ecosystem, with frequencies of up to 70 GHz predicted, even more power will be required for the effective transmission of its millimeter waves. Then the natural environment, the animal and plant kingdoms will be totally saturated with an invisible fog of very high radiation. In this brief historical sketch, we see higher and higher frequencies forming the basis of every new technological innovation developed by man. As each of the new technologies has been introduced, the human being has become a little more dissociated from the natural world and nature itself. Consider how it happened. Starting in the 1890s, the supply of electrical energy to homes, schools, hospitals and factories revolutionized living standards, freeing humanity from subservience to nature's day and night, summer and winter cycles, by giving access to a new source of light, heat and power. Then, in the 1920s, radio made it possible for people to communicate over great distances and brought the voices of kings and politicians, singers and poets into our living rooms, even if they weren't physically present. In the 1950s, Television intensified the experience of an absent but present world, conveyed by the moving image. I remember, as a child, the addictive quality of television. One is drawn out of oneself and one's awareness of one's surroundings into the fascinating world of images of a story shown on the screen. With the advent of the smartphone, the addiction trend has been greatly strengthened, in part because the screen has become a portable interface to the Internet and in part because of the deliberately exploitative policies of Facebook, Google and others to trap people in an addictive relationship with your devices. The addiction to using social media via smartphones displaces users from their own center of immobility and, at the same time, disconnects them from the natural environment and from themselves. The 5G phone system will further accentuate this tendency for people to get lost and will further weaken their relationship with nature, as it promises to make advanced immersive virtual reality accessible to everyone. While VR headsets have been commercially available for some time, VR is still in its infancy. The next development in virtual reality technology is to complement the headset with a tactile suit, which allows the wearer to experience sensations of touch, pressure, heat, hardness, softness, wetness and dryness, in virtual reality. These opportunities for full immersion in virtual reality will lead to growing confusion about which world we really belong in, the electronically generated or the natural world. The use of augmented reality, made possible through special helmets, electronic glasses or contact lenses. People will adjust to seeing the virtual world as having as much right to their attention, emotions and thoughts as the natural world. The temptation will be to give your allegiance to that which not only undermines your relationship with nature, but also, through its attack on the imagination, has a corrosive effect on the inner life of the soul. The confusion will only be exacerbated by a huge increase in the use of 3D holography, which will give virtual entities the ability to electronically incarnate in the physical environment. This is what the saturation of the world with extremely high frequency and powerful millimeter waves will allow. The waves themselves are only part of the problem. It is the technologies that float on the backs of the waves and their impact, dependence, on our inner lives that should also concern us. The formation of the global electronic brain. But if 5G promises to radically alter the experiential world we inhabit in this way, there is something else we must understand if we are to understand what is really being prepared. As increasingly sophisticated, technologies increasingly disconnect human beings from the natural and real world, a network of electronic intelligence of global scope has gradually emerged, and will take over. At first it was under human supervision, but it has become increasingly autonomous. Consider the difference between broadcasting and the Internet. The former is under strict human control and serves a very specific purpose, while the latter has established itself as a permanent and constantly available electronic infrastructure of undefined scope and scope. Efforts now underway to create a 5G electronic ecosystem are the necessary precondition for developing and perfecting a global artificial intelligence (AI) network that feeds on the very rapid transfer of vast amounts of information. This global, electronic brain, innocently called the Internet of Things, is already having an impact on our lives. Through the Internet of Things, more and more things will be connected to the Internet and made smart by being given the ability to function autonomously. The elite's agenda in full swing, towards the final solution. On smart highways, your car drives itself while you, wearing your VR headset and haptic vest, play interactive computer games in the back seat, and in your smart home your fridge will autonomously order more eggs, milk and cheese for you via a wireless connection with a supplier. But the reality is that the Internet of Things itself is the precursor to what has been called the Internet of Thought, in which human beings will have to live in relation to the vast, global electronic intelligence. It will be active throughout our environment and we will be forced to interact with it to carry out the simplest tasks. In the Internet of Thinking it is not difficult to see the traces of an electronically overloaded totalitarian state, with unprecedented control over the minutiae of individuals' lives. The possibility of this happening will only be increased by the thousands of new miniphone and satellite stations radiating every inch of the planet with millimeter waves. For that is what 5G means. It means deploying not just an improved telecommunications system, but a new system of systems, the infrastructure of electronic totalitarianism. A curtain drawn against the light. As our world is increasingly smothered in a haze of radio, microwave, electromagnetic and millimeter waves, it may seem as if the gods of the underworld have taken hold of humanity with a never-increasing grip, luring us into the false lights. The illusory lights of hell beings and hungry ghosts that the Tibetan Book of the Dead long ago warned against. The electromagnetic energies that we summoned, and that promised to give us new powers, now seem to be taking over us, taking us into an underworld realm of hellish entertainment and distraction, of illusion and disconnection from the reality that really matters, the reality of nature and reality. Spiritual order that infuses nature, the reality of other creatures with whom we share our world, living on the ground, in the waters and in the sky and walking the earth alongside us. We must ask ourselves, do Earth and humans really need an electronic ecosystem? Are we going to benefit in any way from being abusively irradiated with potent energies? Is there really any need for 5G technology? Can we even remotely conceive that 5G is the answer to any of the pressing ecological, social and spiritual problems we face today? We are on a terrible threshold, but surrendering to despair cannot be the right answer. What can we do? First of all, we can protest. There are campaigns against the deployment of the 5G system that we can join, there are petitions to sign, letters to write and lawsuits to support. The best place to start is the international appeal to stop 5G on Earth and in space, which has so far gathered more than 40,000 signatures, including those from many health professionals, environmentalists and other scientists. But beyond the protest, there is something else that needs to be done, which is to bring about a spiritually informed understanding of the deeper meaning of the global electronic brain, whose emergence 5G will accelerate. To do so, we need to develop a clear sense of the moral quality of electricity and recognize the type of entity or spiritual entities it serves. This will enable us to break the spell that electronics and electronic technologies have cast on us and allow us to form a more appropriate relationship with them. Subscribe to the channel. Decontaminate your immune system. One of Rudolf Steiner's most useful insights into electricity was his observation that it is light in a fallen and degraded state, light that has fallen under nature, into the subnatural realm, and this is why we must actively guard against an ever-increasing dependence on electricity, growing in it as it threatens to drag us down. This points to a third thing that we can do, which is really the foundation of everything else. It is to rebuild our relationship with the light, which in its benevolence and altruistic purity greets us every morning, and which, unlike the false and illusory electronic lights that would take us to the underworld, beckons us in a very different direction, towards our essential humanity. Through a deep meditative relationship with the light, practiced during the hours of the day and the seasons, we can nurture a relationship with our own inner light, which is the source of all that is creative, beautiful, and good in the world. This inner light the Christian tradition knows as the cosmic logos. As the curtain of electrosmog closes on our world, we are presented with a sacred task that, come what may, we will attend to all that the light has to give us, for therein lies the divine saving power, for the alternative is if transform into a salivating zombie. The Matrix, the mind control system. The Matrix is a control system, Neo. This system is our enemy. But, when you're inside it, look around, and what do you see? Businessmen, teachers, lawyers, politicians, carpenters, priests, men and women. Image result for puppet gift the same minds as the people we are trying to save. But until we manage to save them, these people will still be part of this control system, and that makes them our enemies. You have to understand, most of these people are not prepared to be disconnected from the mind control matrix. And many of them are so used to so desperately dependent on the system, that they will fight you to protect the very control system that imprisons their minds. Enabling 5G towers will wipe out people who have been bitten from the current disease, analysts warn. Sean, host of the Sargent Reports online show, pointed out that there is evidence of 5G towers emitting some sort of electromagnetic waves that directly attack the bodies of people bitten. As evidence, he provided a video released to the public by La Quinta Columna. La Quinta Columna, a Spanish-language media outlet, is notable for being one of the first independent outlets to report that bites from the current illness contain the toxic substance graphene oxide. 5G exposure is a significant factor in higher COVID cases, deaths. Stings make people more susceptible to 5G because they are more susceptible to these electromagnetic pulse attacks because their bodies contain graphene oxide. As a result, the risk of becoming a zombie will be greater. This magnetic substance, when inside a person's system, can cause deadly health complications including liver and kidney damage, stimulate the formation of granulomas in the lungs, and even trigger pre-programmed cell death. Placed by the stings and activated by 5G. Decontaminate your immune system. The Creator gave us natural immunity. Why are certain components of 5G cell towers labeled COVID-19? Have you ever stopped to think, question? If the person who was hit by the 5G tower's electromagnetic pulse had graphene in their system because of the COVID-19 sting, that person becomes significantly less likely to ignore an electromagnetic pulse. Watch this episode of the Sargent Report show as presenter Sean talks about the activation of 5G towers in the United States. So you will know how zombie human beings will arise. Free yourself from child conditioning and narco-hypnosis. Awaken spiritually. Decontaminate your immune system. War is spiritual. Help us save as many humans as possible from this satanic tyranny system. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and activate notifications.